Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, Sunday morning, wherever you may be across all 24 time zones spanning the globe or across the galaxy, any place censorable by the Zuckerbergian Ministry of Truth. Previously recorded live in front of a televised studio audience and brought to you in the palm of your hand and on your screen by Edna the Operator and the all-new fully transistorized Pacific Bell rotary telephone system on KFD. We're up at the Pavilions car show in Scottsdale, Arizona. I came here a little earlier than normal and I'm going to try this YouTube thing with the GoPro. So let's go walk around. I'm going to go data dump some old cars here and you guys out in YouTube land can tell me how wrong I am. Let's start off right now with this CUDA. Now, tail of the tape is going to tell you BS23H3B, which means it's a 1973, H obviously, 340. Now this platform was introduced in 1970. It was actually a revised version of the 71 to 74 Dodge Charger and subsequent B-body floor pan. Now, the CUDA actually has a 108-inch wheelbase, and its sibling, the Dodge Challenger, has an 111-inch wheelbase. Now, of course, look at this rally gauge instrumentation with a tough wheel. In fact, you can always tell a small block tack from a big block tack because that small block tack is actually going to have a higher red line. If we look over here, check it out. We even have a fender tag, which is really cool. EN2 means this was built on line 2 at Hamtramck. I mean, we can see we've got JA5, this beautiful gray color. I can't remember what it is off the top of my head. Black vinyl top, V1X. Check it out. It actually has a scheduled production date of April 25th, 1972. Fairly late production car within the fourth quarter. And of course, H3B, Hamtramck, and of course, BS23. Let's see, any other neat options, console, bucket seats, that sort of stuff. Anyway, pretty nice. Now, if we go over here to this 72, 74-ish Roadrunner, this is that platform I was talking about. In fact, that engine cowl box is the exact same on this car, and the reason being, Chrysler found out in 1968 when they tried to stuff a 426 Hemi into a Barracuda or a Dart, didn't actually work out so well. Of course, when General Motors had their 400 cubic inch ban lifted in 1968, thank you Bunky Knudsen, that meant Pandora's box was open. That's when we started seeing all of these big block engines and small cars, and of course, the upcoming Barracuda and Dodge Challenger pony car was going to be based on the A-body until they realized, you know, we can't exactly stuff a 440 in a Dart. We tried that. We can't do it on a larger scale. But like I say, this is a fuselage Roadrunner. I want to say this is GB3 Petty Blue. Now, in 1970, when we first saw this color on a Superbird, it was originally 999. What does the tail of the tape say? TB3. So what's interesting about these color codes is T is going to, this first number is actually going to denote the year. And Chrysler did that across the board. If you look at, like, say, a 1970 440, it'll say F440 on this little pad. This one doesn't have it because it's a 318. Which was an option, but E44 corresponds to that. But it would say 1970. Then, of course, B is going to be for blue. And then, of course, this last part is going to be your shade gradient from 1 to 9, light to dark. So when everybody talks about these new Chargers being F8 green, the actual original Mopar code was EF8 green. Anyway, but this, of course, is going to have the Roadrunner meep meep horn. And I know that JC wouldn't repop it. I'm trying to look in here. I can't remember where it is on these things. It's somewhere over here in this corner. But the earlier cars actually had a horn that was painted like this lilac blue, and it said the voice of the Roadrunner on it. And it was actually, basically, it was because of the aluminum contacts inside the horn that gave it that real interesting name. And of course, at this time as well, a lot of these car companies were actually using, thank you, there it is right there. There it is. Voice of the Roadrunner. And that was the same for this car from 68 to 74. And I'm not sure about the later subsequent Velaris. But as I was saying, what's interesting is we're really starting to see pop culture have an effect on Detroit. Of course, we started seeing the GTO Judge from Laugh-In. And now we've got, around the same year, we had Plymouth using the Warner Brothers character Roadrunner. And that's where that came from. And, okay, let's go. We can talk about the 318 since it's here. This is one of the bread and butter engines of Chrysler. Now, this engine actually first appeared, I want to say I think it was in 1965. I could be wrong. 64, 65 as the 273. This is actually known as the LA or Light A engine. It had basically replaced the old Plymouth Poly 318 and 326 cubic inch ranges. In fact, the 5.2 soldered on from 1967 question mark-ish, 67, 68, I believe, all the way up until 2002. Last seen in the Dakotas and I think some of the Ram trucks. And of course, this was replaced by the Gen 3 Hemi. Okay, now what do we got here? Real nice, beautiful Tri-5. Look at that paint. Wow. This is something else really cool. This is a Willys, 1940-ish, I believe, Willys. And Willys Overland was also the same Willys that did Jeep as well. Look right there. We've got the serial number. This one's all steel. And what do we got back here? Nicely done small block. Couple of double pumpers. Gotta have all that billet. Wow. Okay, let's keep on going. Now, if Henry Ford had his way, we would still be driving around Model Ts and Model As. Now, 1932 is the darling year, and I believe this is around that same era, 32, 33. And actually, the Ford V8 was completely replaced the Model A. That was the first time we saw a car. We saw Ford with a V8. And of course, it wasn't the first domestic V8. Chevrolet owns that title. Let's take a look at this thing, SYC. Now, here's another thing too: is there's Don Yanko started something. He had a small dealership in Pennsylvania, and of course, as I was saying, in the mid-60s, there was an edict in General Motors: you cannot have an engine larger than 400 cubic inches in a small car, such as this Camaro. Well, Don Yanko said, "Hold my beer. We're going to go get a big block, and we're going to stuff it in a Camaro." In this case, this was the 427, which was replaced in 1970. The short deck version, or the tall deck version, was replaced in 1970 by the 454. Now, Chevrolet realized, wait a minute, we can actually do this too. Hold our beer. And they actually made the homebrewed version known as the COPO, Central Office Production Order. Of course, we've seen that later in more modern Camaros that have that. Look at it, we got the horseshoe shifter. Now, one interesting detail I never understood about these cars was the fact that the gauge cluster in these had the little AC, like AC Delco. And of course, they have the SYC 427. Of course, we've got the big block with its aluminum heads. Now, I couldn't tell you if this is real or not. I don't know. I'm assuming it is. Look at the inspection marks on there. Pretty neat. A nice little square bird. Let's go over here. Look at this thing.
I don't know when this is going to stop. Yeah. There's no indication.
1970 Cadillac Coupe de Ville. Now, this actually is going to have the 472. The engine that came after this was actually the largest production engine up until recently, of course, with the only exception being that Viper motor. But another interesting detail about these Cadillac engines, one of the very few times where styling actually won over engineering was in this hood, because you got to think, your average Cadillac consumer who had a beautiful blonde passenger, they didn't want a car with a bulged hood. So of course, these Cadillac engines had a very, very restrictive manifold, just so they didn't have to put a bulge in the hood. Anyway,
yeah, he wasn't thinking.
That's a lot of metal. Buick Grand National. This is actually a T-type, so it's very, very similar to the Grand National. I can't remember the details. Someone out there can tell me, but Buick, of all companies in the 80s, made this thing, and it's actually it's wicked. Of course, we saw one get a lot of notoriety in some of the recent Fast and Furious movies. Let's go back over here. Let's keep on going. Let's see. 427 ZL1. Yes, ZL1 was a thing long before that. And look at that manifold. Holy cow. Cross ram, big block. Man, what a unit. Of course, we got correct polyglass tires on it as well. And the big sticky meats, the houndstooth, the whole nine. Okay. Corvair Corsa. Here's another one. Of course, much maligned by Ralph Nader. The car's midlife got a complete styling upgrade. Or I'm sorry, a complete engineering upgrade. Redesigned rear suspension, the whole nine. This is a little Corsa, 164 turbo air. This is actually one of the first turbocharged cars from General Motors. I think the Oldsmobile Starfire question mark has that distinction. Again, someone out in YouTube land, you can tell me. I can't remember off the top of my head. But what's really interesting is Corvair basically, or Chevrolet, wanted to make some sort of competition to the Volkswagen. So they basically said, hey, Volkswagen, can we copy your homework? And they said, yeah, sure. And of course, they made this air-cooled, horizontally opposed, flat piston layout, 6-cylinder. And one of the big Achilles heels of these things, and these motors are an absolute marvel of engineering themselves. But that's the fan right there. A lot of times those are actually magnesium. And of course, the biggest issue you can see was the fan would break because of that really unique pulley system. Now, Porsche conquered that by putting in a gear bevel drive. And of course, Chevrolet didn't have the resources or didn't have the means of of cost efficiency by building something like that. Now, of course, you can also see this has the optional 6-gauge pod. That's how you can tell it's definitely a Corsa. Really cool to see that. And something else kind of unique about these cars that they basically, again, stole from Volkswagen, is because of the layout of the engine being back here. This is rear engine, much like a 48 Tucker or a Porsche 911 engine transmission. Your speedometer cable runs off the final drive of a normal transmission with a front engine rear wheel drive layout. And even the front wheel drive cars, speedometer is not that far from the engine. But when you do something like this, where you put the engine in the back instead of running a 17-mile long speedometer cable, Chevrolet actually copied Volkswagen with this very simple ingenious idea, and that's basically they would run the speedometer cable through the spindle, and it runs off that center cap. Pretty cool. And of course, you can check this out. You can also see how close the BMW bolt pattern is to the old GM. I want to say it's 5 on 4 3/4. I can't remember that I can't remember that in metric, but there you go. Really unique little car. First gen Bronco. These things are getting up in value, and it's absolutely insane. We're gonna keep on going. We'll go look at this polished Cobra. That thing's really cool. But I also see a really neat gold C3 New Balance we got to go check out. But let's take a look at this thing. Now these are kind of unique. I mean, I love this aluminum bodywork. I mean, this is absolutely amazing. And look at that thing.
And they go, you know what? We just want to tell you something. You made one of the best investments of your life.
Holy cow.
Yeah. What do you mean?
That's amazing. Now, Carroll Shelby basically took an AC Ace and put a 260 in. If you look at the original AC Ace and the original 260 Cobras, they don't have these flared fenders. You can very much see its British car roots. And what's interesting is they made the super rare Daytona Coupe. AC also did that as well. They made the AC Acica and the Greyhound, and they were completely different cars, completely different engineering, but they had very similar shooting brake alignment arrangement. Okay, here we go. Leaning Tower of Power, Volare, or is this an Aspen? This was the F body in Mopar lingo. What do we got here? This is actually 1979, and SR5. I'm not even sure what that color code is, but look at that. It still has the inspection tag right there. Leaning Tower of Power was first introduced in 1959 with the 170 range. They had the 198, and then of course we've got the 225. This engine actually soldered on until, I want to say, 1996. Yes, 1991. 1991 industrial applications, and of course you can tell the coil's kind of going out in this thing because it's got that resin that has leaked out. Common problem with those ballast resistors. They do that. And this one, I'm partial to these wheels too. These are what is known as the Magnum 500 style. Now, Motor Wheel Company made this wheel for everybody except Buick and Pontiac, AMC, Ford, Chrysler, Oldsmobile, all the same units. Now, the Magnum 500s were actually all chrome. Now, Chrysler in 1970 through 70, I think 74, had the road style, which was painted and actually had a trim ring. Now, the other big difference too with these wheels was the only all chrome wheel produced after 1970 was going to be the Oldsmobile SS1 in 1971, 1 year only. That was it. But other than that, when you see all chrome like that, it's gonna be a Magnum 500. We've got a nice, beautiful 69 68 Camaro. Big old Cadillac Eldorado, and look at these fends. Now, I've spoken ad nauseum before on all my social medias when I go to these car shows. But if you look at this Eldorado, this was the apotheosis of General Motors styling and prestige. I mean, you want to talk about, in addition to General Motors, just our society in general. When you made it, it's a Cadillac, you made it. Now, if you look at these fens also represent the optimism of a society hell-bent on beating the Russians in space. In fact, the fin war kind of started going away by the time this car was built. It's kind of the last ones. I want to say this is maybe a 63. There it is, 63. I mean, of course, 1958, I believe, 58, 59 was the one that had the huge fins. But these fins continued on for a while, and it's kind of a Cadillac trademark. Now, let's go take a look at this thing. Here's something pretty interesting. This is where somebody said, "Hey, Carroll Shelby, let me copy your homework again. We've got this beautiful E-Type. I can't remember the designer off the top of my head, but Enzo Ferrari described this car as the most beautiful car in the world." Now, of course, you've got a problematic 6-cylinder. What do? Put a small block Ford in it. Anyway. How did I walk by and not see this satellite? Let's go take a look at this beautiful B-body. Now again, this is on that platform I was talking about earlier. Big block power. This is a 1971. You can easily tell because it doesn't have the corporate side marker lights. Of course, big bad 440. And you look right down, well, that's warm. Look down there and you can actually see that data plate I was talking about earlier about, you can tell what year the motor is and everything like that. Now, what's interesting, a lot of people don't realize this, is so Plymouth actually did all the engineering for the B series engine. And of course, it debuted in 1958 with two engine choices. The 361, and a lot of people don't know this, Chrysler made the 350 before Chevy did. Now, the other thing that they did as well, in 1959, we saw the introduction of the RB, or the raised block, which was a 413, 426, and then later on we saw the 440 like this. So, ratchet shifter. Looks like it's a factory AC car too. In fact, I bet if we go over here, tail of the tape says, we got a fender tag right there. GY3 cream with a white vinyl top. Originally was a 318 car. RP23, G1G, built in St. Louis. 318, as I said. Black upper door frame paint? Maybe? I don't know. Okay. We do have a scheduled production date of November 27th. How about that? Me and that car share the same birthday. That's cool. And so does Paul McCartney. Now this is the epitome of the Coke bottle shape that Bill Brownlee and his gang designed. And like I say, this debuted in fall of 1970, and this soldiered on until well into the mid 70s. You know, very simple, very beautiful lines. In fact, you actually saw this body style a little bit before these things debuted, and that was part of the Rapid Transit Caravan. 73 hood. Okay, that's why I was thinking that earlier.
71 Plymouth.
Yep.
Yellow 318.
Yellow. Yep. I saw that. Yeah. So wait. Oh wait. Was it GY3 or DY3 cream? Hold on a second. All right. Okay. We have. Oh yeah. GY3. Yep. That's 318 car, and it's a top. That was a top banana white vinyl top. Beautiful car.
Sebring Plus.
Sebring Plus. Oh, that's fancy. That's why it has air conditioning. And also, you notice another option it does have 3-speed wipers. Yeah. That was fancy dancy back then. Yeah, there it is. That's cool. So, okay, let's go take a look over here at this beautiful Bloomington Gold, question mark. Someone out there should be like, that's the wrong color. I can't remember it all. 69 or 70 Stingray. Now, we were talking about Cadillac being the epitome, the apotheosis of prestige. General Motors also made a deal with the Apollo astronauts. Now, you got to remember this, okay, AU 72, AU on the periodic table for gold, 72. So I'm a little bit off. I'm a little rusty in these early C3s, forgive me. But in 1969, General Motors cut a deal with the Apollo astronauts, and they leased these things for $1 a year. In fact, you can tell they're gold and black, and that's kind of what makes me think of this. And of course, what is great advertising like that? It's just, you have the Apollo astronauts. Kids want to be astronauts when they grow up, rolling around in Corvettes. There you go. It's a big block Biscayne. What do we got here? Sure is 427 Caprice. Nice. Of course, more big block representation. You gotta love these big block B bodies. Now, while the B body for Chrysler was kind of this swoopy, kind of svelte kind of design platform, these big bad boys, these were the bruisers. And yes, these things did come factory with 427, the big blocks. And you imagine having a nice sleeper car, 4-speed stick that you can fit 10 of your buddies in. This was back in the days when you can get gasoline for 30 cents a gallon. One of the most recognizable cars in the world. I think the only other car more iconic than this would be the DeLorean. 1957 Chevy. Everybody in their house cat knows these things. These cars, 1.5 million of these produced in 1957. Of course, what Chevrolet did at that point was they just had one basic car, but it had different names. You had the 150, the 210, the Bel Air. I'm sure there's a bunch of other ones I'm missing too. Again, another AC Ace. GT 350 Hertz. You want to go buy a Mustang and go beat it on the track like a rental? This is how you did it back then. Dodge square body. All right. Try 5s Mustangs. Let's see what else we got over here. Look at, is that a Hudson? Or is that a Nash? This thing is an inverted bathtub. Nash Rambler, there it is. Now, here's something fascinating. I'm gonna go. Okay. So this is I want to say this is the Nash Rambler. Now here's what's interesting. This car right here was the first car to ever have air conditioning. In fact, if you look right here, I'm a little rusty. These are probably what these vents are for. Now, the Nash Weather Eye debuted in 1949. And so what they did was they took a girl in the middle of winter in one of these things, made a door out of plexiglass, had her dressed up like it was the middle of summer, just waving to everybody, and that's how they knew these cars had heaters and air conditionings and stuff like that. But yeah, this was the first one right here, and this was an absolute technological marvel, considering the fact that Willis Carrier had invented air conditioning in plants in 1902, and then all of a sudden, a little under 40 years later, we had it in an automobile. Pretty cool to see that thing. Oh. Nash Rambler. I love that color. Okay. What else we got over here? Let's keep on going. 1940 Ford. Okay. Hold on a second. It's going to come to me here in a second. It's got the VG30 in it. This is going to be the... Let's see. The chassis code's escaping me right now. S1... No, not the S130. This would be the Z31, if I remember correctly. Now, this was a radical departure for Nissan, because you got to remember, up until this point, the Nissan Z, or the Datsun Fairlady, as it known outside the United States, had the L28 inline six-cylinder. The L28 inline six-cylinder was actually a licensed copy from Mercedes-Benz of their six-cylinder. Nissan engineers basically copied that Mercedes-Benz six-cylinder, cut 2 cylinders off of it to make the L20 and L24. And of course, that time frame as well, they had licensed copies of Austin and Morris and all those other, a lot of European and British car manufacturers. But in 1970, they needed they needed 2 extra cylinders for the upcoming Fairlady and also the Prince and Cedric and full-size car line. So of course, they took that copy of that Mercedes-Benz six-cylinder that's cut down to 4 cylinders, put 2 cylinders back on it, made the L series, the L24, L28, and so on and so forth. Now, the radical departure was that for the first time with this chassis, we saw the V6, which was the VG30. And that was, again, was a Nissan staple forever. I mean, you gotta think of it, this was also the same era. We got Voltron, we got Transformers, we got all this Japanese technology. So how far out is that? That whole instrumentation is all digital. It probably had the voice that spoke like this too. Exactly, it does. There you go. It's got the speak and spell voice in it. But what people don't realize too is that the technology that Nissan gleaned from this car, you got to remember, up in this point, Nissan did inline 6 cylinders. When they merged with Prince, they had the almighty Prince S20 crossflow head. But then all of a sudden, radical departure was the V6 in this. And of course, the technology, again, they learned from this car has been applied almost 40 years later to the R35 Godzilla GTR. Let's keep on going. This big humpback, what is this thing? I can't remember off the top of my head. Mid-30s, mid to late 30s, small block. Is that a Chevy? Yeah, it is a Chevy. There it is. Okay, I'm going to assume this is probably a 37 to 39 Chevrolet. Man, look at that stretch. Now, of course, now in the original car, the wheels weren't going to be this far forward. This is kind of a drag racing thing. I mean, look at this drag link setup. I mean, it might have been. I'm not sure. Honestly, I don't know. I don't know it all, nor do I claim to know it all. Let's keep on going. Okay. New Balance gang, where are you at? New Balance gang. Okay. I see a lot of regular traffic. Let's go down this way. Let's keep on going. I spy a Chevy Ssr. A lot of people don't realize this Chevy Ssr actually shares the same platform as a Trailblazer. Interesting, but kind of a flop at the same time. They basically emulated a late 40s Chevy truck when they decided to style these things. Of course, removable hardtop or retractable hardtop into the back of the car. Beautiful New Balance. Mid-60s of some sort, question mark. I can't remember. I don't know. I don't know how to count the gills. Okay, let's keep on going. One of the cars actually sparked the retro design craze back in the late 90s, early 2000s. Aside from the new Beetle, was this right here. And of course, 007 T-Bird, this car was actually featured in, I think it was the Pierce Brosnan era of James Bond's. That was his James Bond villain car. All right. Okay. Wrap Tesla. Look at this Dodge Stealth. Now, the Dodge Stealth and its platform mate, the Mitsubishi 3000 GT, was an absolute tour de force by Diamond Star Motors, which at that time was a collaboration between Mitsubishi and Dodge. In fact, here's something interesting. Is the twin turbo Stealth with its all-wheel steering, electronically controlled ride height and electronically controlled exhaust, was slated to be the pace car for the 1991 Indy 500. And of course, a lot of people raised hell because what the hell is this Japanese car doing pacing Indy 500? And that's when we got the Viper concept. I believe I want to say it was 91 or 92. Viper came out, I think, 93. No, Viper came out 92, so it was 91. Okay, 65 to 67 Chevelle SS 427. I think there might be 66. I can't remember off the top of my head. Okay, let's keep on going. Okay, IROC Z. This is the third iteration of the General Motors F-body. And here's something interesting: is these cars were plentiful, cheap, easy to find. Now they're coming up in price. They really are, and that's one of these cars that if you can pick one up now, like this and its counterpart, the Fox Body Mustang. Of course, this has the Vortec 350. We started seeing the serpentine belt drive first in 1984 in the Corvette, and then of course when they had the modern update of the Vortec, which has a different intake manifold, a few other revisions to it, we started to see them in these cars as well. But as I was saying, if you can pick one of these up on the cheap, please do it. So, okay, Plymouth Prowler. Here's another neat styling exercise. This one was actually designed down at the Pacifica Design Center, and this car was actually inspired by the Chip Foose design Hemisphere, which he did in the late 90s. And of course, the stylist at Chrysler down at the Pacific Studios said, "Hey, here you go, have fun," and they did. Now, the only problem with this car that everyone maligned this car is because it had a V6 from the minivan. Now you imagine if they had put a 360 in it, or the 5.9 from say the RT range, this would have been an absolute hot ticket. Now what's interesting about this is, so this car from 99 to 2001 was the Plymouth Prowler, and then of course when Chrysler folded in 2002, this was badged as the Chrysler Prowler. But pretty neat to see one of these things. You don't see too many of these cars anymore. Hell yeah, brother. Elvis approves. Okay. Look at this GT40. Of course, a lot of people have recognized this car because of the movie Ford versus Ferrari that came out a couple years ago. Now, this car is actually, this body itself was actually designed by Lotus. A lot of people realize that these bodies, these things were built over in England by Lotus. Of course, Lotus and Ford had a working relationship then. In fact, if you look at a Ford 8N tractor, it's going to have a Lotus starter in it. Fun fact. But Sir Colin Chapman always had this ethos of adding lightness to all his cars, and it certainly showed here. And of course, you've seen the movie for Ford versus Ferrari. I don't have to rehash anything over it, but you can't get more American than stuffing a big block in it. When in doubt, big block it out. All right. Okay, friends, I think that's about it for today. That's everything. So thanks for watching, and I'm here to remind you, follow your passions.